I'm Sarah and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about my reading plans for autumn. So back at the start of summer I made like a summer TBR of 9 books that I wanted to read during the summer. I've read 6, which is not too bad, and I started the 7th. The other 2 books left, Cancer Ward by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, which is very long, and The Hobbit by Tolkien, which I had to return to the library before I got to it. So I don't really have plans to read either of those ones particularly soon. So I feel like it's still been a success, but I thought for autumn, instead of giving myself a very strict TBR, I would more group it into categories of types of books I'd like to read and show you some of the books that I have that I could read. Because as soon as I make a very strict TBR, I instantly want to read other things. So yeah, this is more like a mood board for autumn, if you will. So yeah, I think there are certain types of books that fit very well with autumn. I'd say in general longer books when the nights are getting dark and you can just sit and curl up with a big book. And there are a few readathons that take place in autumn that I would like to participate in to some extent. I'm never going to be the sort of person that reads like 5 books for a readathon, because again, as soon as I start making a TBR, I just want to read other things. But I would like to at least read 1 book for some of these things. And so the first thing that I would really like to focus on in autumn is fantasy books. I have basically read very little fantasy, or at least no fantasy that I've really enjoyed. And so I'm making a reading vlog at the moment where I'm reading 5 fantasy books that are quite popular, or that I think I'll like for whatever reason, and in the hope that I will find a new favourite fantasy book. So stay tuned for that. I won't share the books just now because that video will be up in a couple of weeks. But yeah, I think that autumn is a great time to read fantasy. It's quite immersive. And yeah, I'd like a book that I can really get sucked into, but as it stands at the moment, I have not really found anything that I really like from the fantasy genre, but I do think that it could be for me. Next thing that really screams autumn to me is definitely historical fiction. I think again, they can be quite long, but also getting immersed in another world as well, similar to fantasy. So I think that autumn is a great time of year to read this when you want to hibernate, essentially. I have quite a few historical fiction books, but some of the ones that I would like to get to are Memoirs of Hadrian by Marguerite Yourcenar, and this is a book that's translated from the French, written in like the mid 20th century, I think, that is very much a historical fiction about the Emperor Hadrian. It's told from his point of view. I don't really know very much about the Roman Emperor, but I did start reading the first few pages of this, and the writing was really beautiful and it really did suck you in. This is definitely like a modern classic that is on a lot of people's like favourite reads lists, so I'm really hopeful that this is going to be good. It's also not very long. I think it would be a good one because I think it will be immersive, but it's not going to take up too much of my time. So I'm hopeful I might get to this one. The other one I talked about in my series I'd like to start soon, and that's the first book in the Kristin Lavransdatter sort of, it's not really a series, this is just the first book out of like 3 books that they're normally published all together, but yeah, I just bought the first one individually. And this one follows Kristin Lavransdatter, who's a 14th century Norwegian woman, and it's just following her life. So again, Norway and those sort of colder countries really scream autumn winter to me, so I think that this could be a good one, and I have heard really good things about it, so I'm hopeful. And because this is the start of a series, like if I like it, then I can continue reading the series. And then the last one, which has been on my TBR for a very long time, that I've like been putting off, but I do think it will be a good autumn winter read, and that is The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel. I've read the first 2 in the Hval trilogy, so I've read Hval, I've read Bring Up the Bodies back in like 2020, 2021. And this one has been on my shelf since I think about August 2021, so about 3 years now, and it's just like quite a bit longer than the rest of the series. I think the first book's about 600 pages and the second book about 450, and this one's over 900 pages. I've also not heard as good things about the last one, so I'm just a little bit nervous about it. This book follows Thomas Cromwell in the court of Henry VIII and all of his sort of schemes and plotting. And the first 2 books are really good, so I think I do want to find out how this story finishes. I just haven't got around to it yet. But this one is another option for autumn. I don't want to commit to 100% reading this, but this is an option. Autumn is great for sort of spookier reads as well, and I do not read any horror because I'm like the biggest scaredy cat ever, but there are a few books on my TBR that I think are a little bit more sort of horror leaning or spooky in some way. The first two, in fact, all of these are library books. The first two are library reservations that haven't come in yet, but I think should come in the next month or so. So there's Monstrilio, which I've heard really good things about. This, from the brief summary I've read, is about a mother who loses her 11-year-old child, and she cuts out a bit of his lung and sort of is trying to grow it back into a person, but ends up turning into a monster. That might not be entirely right, but that's what I've read. I've heard the writing is really beautiful in this, and I think it's like a bit of a weird story. This is probably not a book that I would have picked up like particularly soon, but my library had a copy, so I was like, okay, great, I'll give it a go. So I do think I will quite like this one, as long as it's not too scary. And then the other one that's not come in yet is Paradise Rot by Jenny Hval. Again, I don't know how I'm going to get on with this one. Jenny Hval is a Danish author, I believe, and this is a book about a girl who moves into a new flat at uni, and the flat's really creepy. Like, I think there's a lot of sort of rotting fruit imagery or like rotting flesh. I'm not sure, but I think this is going to be a very atmospheric autumn read. And the last one is a hold that's already come in from the library, and that's It Lasts Forever, and then it's Over by Anne de Marken. I've heard really good things about this book, but I probably, if I hadn't heard the good things, I would never have picked this up because it doesn't really sound like my sort of thing, but I'm hopeful it's going to be really good. So this is a sort of post-apocalyptic afterlife story. I don't think this one's going to be particularly scary, but I guess it's about dead people. So I think it's about a girl who's died and she's sort of haunting the afterlife. It says, travelling across the landscapes of time and of space, heading always west and carrying a dead but laconically impugnacy crow in her chest, our undead narrator encounters and loses parts of her body and herself in one terrifying, hilarious and heartbreaking situation after another. So it sounds interesting, and it's very short. So I'm planning to get to this autumn. I also think that autumn really screams to me like Russian classics. Just because Russia's a very cool country, Russian classics are quite chunky, they're quite immersive. So there are a couple that I have on my TBR that I've been meaning to get to for a very long time that hopefully I'll at least be able to pick up one this autumn. I'm not committing to both. The first one is The Karamazov Brothers by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This one's been on my TBR for quite a while as well. I've read Crime and Punishment and I've read The Idiot, and I did really enjoy both of them. And then last month I read White Nights, and I did quite like it as well. So I'm ready for a big chunky work by Dostoevsky. This follows three brothers after the death of their father, I think, and they're all sort of very different people, and they sort of embody different aspects of morality, is from what I gather. I have heard really, really good things about this one, so I do want to read it. It's just, let me tell you the page count. This copy that I have is 1012 pages. There are some notes at the end, but yeah, it is long. So we'll see how we go with that one. And the other sort of Russian, I think it's more of a modern classic I have, is Dr. Zhivago by Boris Pasternak. This book, like, it makes it look bigger than it is because this is a massive edition. This is the edition that I read War and Peace and Anna Karenina in, and I really like the sort of floppy pages, so when I saw this one in the charity shop I picked it up. But this book is only actually about 500 pages, so that's not too bad. What's put me off reading this one is that I've heard it's incredibly, incredibly sad, and I just don't know if I am emotionally ready for that. This is about Yuri Zhivago, who's a physician and poet. It's a love story, sort of about 20th century Russia, I think. But yeah, I think some really bad things are going to happen in this. I do want to read it though. I think this will be a perfect autumn wintry read. And then, yeah, a couple of readathons that take place every year that I would like to take part in this year. First is Victober. I would say that I read like at least a few Victorian books every year, and they are very good for autumn because quite often they are chunky. They do tend to be quite dense descriptive books, so I think it's good for this time of year. I actually only have 2 or 3 Victorian books on my physical TBR, so I picked 2 that I think I could get to. The first one's been on my TBR for a very long time, and that's Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell. I read North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell, and I really enjoyed it, so I don't really know why I've not got to this one. I think the problem I had is I picked it up and I read the first like 30-40 pages, and I was quite enjoying it, but I wasn't in the mood for it. then I put it back down, and then I think once you've like read the start of a book, you need to wait a while before you feel like you want to pick it up again. So I think in there now, this one is also quite long. I think it's about 600. It's about 600 pages, and it follows Molly Gibson, who has been brought up by her father, and then her father takes a new wife who already has daughters, and she goes to live with them. And I think to start with, they're probably not going to get on very well, and then they're going to grow into a friendship. So I think this one, I just need to bite the bullet with it because it's been sitting there for ages. I don't feel particularly drawn to pick it up, but I know that when I read it, I will enjoy it. So I just need to, again, get to this one. And then the other book that I'd like to get to for October is The Way of All Flesh by Samuel Butler. I read Erewhon by Samuel Butler earlier on this year, and I really liked it. He writes quite satirical books about Victorian society. And this one is no different. This one says it's Samuel Butler's great autobiographical novel sounding the death knell of the Victorian age. It says it was published in 1903. That might be it. I can't remember the dates of the Victorian era. I think that might be after Victorian, but he's a Victorian author. I'm going to count it. Anyway, it says Butler's savage Victorian values and belief in this thinly disguised account of his own childhood and youth in the bosom of a Christian family. So I think this is definitely a social commentary on Victorian values, so I think it still counts for October, even if it's not during the Victorian time. Yeah, I think that Samuel Butler writes satire really well, really smartly, so I am excited to get to this one. And this one, it doesn't look that long, but it is actually about over 400 pages. So yeah, those are the two for October. And then non-fiction November is another one that I would like to take part in. I know that there are always prompts that come out that you're meant to try and find books to fit in, but I actually don't have very many non-fiction books on my TBR, so I'm just going to show you the ones I've got, and I can always try and fit them into something. The first one is a library book that I've been really excited to get to, and it's A Garden Against Time by Olivia Laing. I really like Olivia Laing. I've read a couple of her books, both non-fiction. I've read Everybody, and I've read the one that came out in COVID that's like got the pink cover. I'll put a picture up. And I really like both of them. I really like the way that she discusses art and artists. It seems like she blends it very well into her essays. And yeah, I'm really interested in whatever she has to say. So this one, let me read roughly what it's about. In 2020, Olivia Laing began to restore a walled garden in Suffolk, an overgrown Eden of unusual plants. And then I think she starts to look at gardens in art and fiction. So it says that she talks about Paradise Lost, Derek Jarman, William Morris. So I think it's going to be quite interesting. She blends together sort of narrative non-fiction and memoir and art criticism really well. So I think this is going to be a very interesting read. I might need to read this one before November because I imagine that other people have this reserved at the library, and I literally just took it out yesterday, so I'm probably going to need to get to this in the next 2-3 weeks. And then lastly, a book that it's not even mine. Scott bought this years ago and he never read it, and I wasn't that interested in it, and I went to do a clear out of books and it made the cut because there was some part of me that was like, no, I do kind of want to read that. And that's Underland by Robert Macfarlane. I've heard really good things about this book, but it just doesn't really sound like my cup of tea. I'm not particularly interested in this sort of nature writing, but because I've heard such good things, I really do want to give it a go. This, as the title would suggest, is a sort of exploration of the Earth's underworlds as they exist in myth, literature, memory, and the land itself. So yeah, I would like to give this one a go and see how we got on. So those are very much my loose reading plans for autumn. I'm really excited to pick up some longer books, some fantasy books, some more classics. I've not read too many longer classics recently, and yeah, some creepy books and some Victorian literature. I feel like I'm excited about my reading again. I think I have a lot of good options in this pile. Maybe see if I can do some vlogs for October, non-fiction November. We'll see how it goes. So yeah, let me know if you have any particular genres or types of books that you like to read in the autumn time, and any recommendations you have for any of the things I've mentioned. I would love to add more books to my list. Why not? So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you again soon.